Hey everyone, I want to share with you today some of these steps of the branding process. You hear me say all the time about the design process steps and going from those initial stages all the way through the steps of the process in order to get to a final finished product like this. But what does that actually look like? So I wanted to share with you kind of a case study in one of my projects that I've recently completed in order to show you what that can look like. Obviously, some of those first stages happen in our sketchbook. It happens pencil on paper. You can see I'm identifying the challenge. I'm listing out anything that I can think of. I'm trying to research about the topic a little bit more. I'm trying to find any signs and symbols in my sketchbook and collecting all this information, all this background information. So of course I started in my sketchbook. That is step number one, identifying the challenge there. Some ideas come to you very quickly. Some ideas need a little bit more time to simmer, but that's not where we end, right? It doesn't go straight from my sketchbook in directly to this final finished brand. I'll give you a sneak peek of this brand to start off with here. This is the final logo, and you can see some of the branding elements layered in. And this is the actual brand board that I sent my client. So you can see we have the color options laid out, and we have some secondary logo marks in the color scheme that we finalized here. And we keep going down. There's the entire color scheme. So now my client has a toolkit that they can rely on in order to pull the correct colors when they're creating graphics. And just to keep moving, oh, I'm moving myself. Let me keep moving down the page here. I have the typography laid out as what I would actually be using. So your typography, you might have this, like this it actually is the type Filson Pro that's in the logo mark for this brand, but that might not be the case every single time. These two type choices could be completely different based on the branding that you are implementing. You can see I'm implementing this script typeface, which can be a little difficult to read. You always want to keep that in mind. I don't often use a script typeface in a branding like this, but you can see I gave some examples to my client to show how that could be used within the system. So we're developing that graphic language here of how are all these parts and pieces used together. You can see that I'm starting to layer. I'm using kind of a highlight color as one of those lighter colors, and then I'm layering on typography and graphics on top of that. So the layering aspect of this branding that you see on the branding board here, even in these elements down here at the bottom, that's really an indication of how this brand is used. It's not just flourishes and fun to make a pretty branding board. These are actually describing how these parts and pieces can be used in this real brand. So this is where the brand has ended up. But again, I started in that sketchbook and then I went through a lot more phases in order to get there. So that's what I want to show you here. To start off with, I started with two design directions for my client, two distinct directions, in order to kind of feel them out and start that conversation of what's working, what's not working, what's resonating with my client, and what are they a little bit opposed to. It's really about starting the conversation. So I had some ideas in this first direction, some ideas in the second direction. It's really about I'm almost asking my client questions through these visuals that I'm demonstrating for them. So while for certain projects you might not always have multiple directions to start off with, it's a good way to be thinking because you want, as a designer, you want to be exploring multiple possibilities. So even if you don't have a client that's going to be looking at these design directions and giving you feedback, it's a really good place to start for you as a designer in order to see as many directions as possible, basically. But even this didn't start so clean and pretty. I have these nice two branding boards that I presented to my client, but let's actually look at what that design file really looked like. This is more like where we start. And so you can see here that I have a lot of parts and pieces here that I started off with those initial ideas from my sketchbook. There were a couple ideas. This logo mark here, this kind of came to me. Sometimes ideas come to you very quickly. This was one of those that it stuck in my brain. I had to get it out on paper. It's one of the first sketches that I actually drew in the sketchbook here. But it was just one of those graphics that as soon as I started talking to this client and hearing more about what she was working on, this design just popped into my mind and I had to put it down. Because if something like that pops in your mind and you don't put it down, it's the only thing you're going to be able to be thinking about. It just won't go away until you put it on paper or try it out in Illustrator and see if it's actually working. So I had to get it down. I really was interested in kind of this very floaty system. I was thinking a little bit of like a mid-century mod type of style. And I was thinking about that color palette. She had mentioned to me she really liked this mustard color. A little bit of this very, very pale light pink was interesting to her. So I was playing with a lot of those ideas and seeing how her ideas and my ideas could come together in this first direction. So that's direction one, was kind of this mid-century mod idea. And you can see that I developed a one color mark out of it as well. Your logos always have to work in one color, even in this modern world of, web-based businesses and things like that. There's going to be an instance at some point during that business's lifetime that you're going to need that one color mark. So you might as well design the brand from the ground up with a one color mark in mind. So while suppose that this branding got chosen, this might be their primary logo mark with all the colors, and that could be used all over social media and their website and all that kind of stuff. But I want to make sure that this exists and works very well also, and that it works together well. So that's why I have these multiple marks here. I want to always make sure that I have that one color. And so you can see here, I am playing with a lot of these applications here. I am trying different parts and pieces, and I'm seeing how they work together. Again here, one of the ideas from my sketchbook was kind of this starburst idea, and you can see these were actually the first ones that I tried with this arrangement, that little sunburst at the top and the bottom. But what I was feeling like was that these were too geometric. It was a little too clean, especially with this nice typeface. That was actually where I started here. Let me come down here first. I was playing with the typeface. I knew this color palette was interesting to my client, and I wanted to play with a lot of that typography that was kind of top of mind for me. So here, I actually started here with just typing out the company name and seeing what it looks like in those different arrangements. Then I started playing with what those colors looked like on the color palette, what the typography looked like on the color palette, and you can see that certain things start popping out. This typeface is actually the one that I ended up going with that final brand that you've seen already. And you can see I'm already starting to play with the contrast between the bold and the lightweight font within, breaking up the words. And so some of those ideas, those little seeds were planted here in this initial design. So it actually happened really early on. And those were the things that were strongest and kept growing and collecting new things along the way to develop into this very full brand. So right there you have like this little peek at where the brand is going. So from there is when I started doing these little sunburst designs. And this first one that I tried with the sunburst was a little too geometric, like I mentioned. It was just a little bit too precise somehow. And this brand is a little bit more personal. It's a little bit more about community. And so I wanted to try this in a little bit more of a handmade arrangement. So I did pull this in on the iPad, and I drew, I pulled in the actual geometry from Illustrator first, and then on my iPad I was able to very gently trace and create this little bit of handmade look to it. So it's not super obvious, but it's just the tiniest bit handmade to give it a little bit of a softer edge here. So that was what I was going for with that sunburst. And I was also thinking about, with the little dots there, I was thinking about layering in a little bit more meaning here. As I mentioned, it's a very community focused brand, and so I was actually thinking about a very simple abstract person icon there. So you can see that we might have multiple people coming together, and there's also significance in the numbers here. I have 3 longer, larger lines, and those are representative of the 3 pillars of my client's brand here. And so there is actually a lot of meaning, even though it's a very simple shape and it was done very simply in Illustrator. I've layered in meaning based on my knowledge of identifying the challenge with my client. I understand her business and her goals, and so I'm able to now layer in little layers of meaning like that. So within all this, as I mentioned, we started with identifying the challenge in our sketchbooks, but then here with all of these different iterations I'm practicing, this is really going from that generating phase. In the sketchbook, we generated some ideas based off of the identified challenges. And then here, I'm starting to not only continue that generating phase, but I'm starting to layer in that practicing phase. I'm taking those good ideas from generating and I'm trying them in different ways. So the sunburst idea was an idea I generated, and then I tried it here. I practiced it with the geometry that I was given in Illustrator. It wasn't quite working, so then I practiced it again I did this actually in Procreate, but you could do this in Adobe Fresco or Adobe Illustrator on the iPad. You could layer in this more handmade look at that point. So I was practicing a new way of doing it, and that actually was the better way of doing it. So from here, you can see I had lots of ideas that I was just trying to get down on paper here, and I wanted to make these two distinct design directions for my client. Again, here it's all about that conversation. Are we going to go down path A, or are we going to go down path B? And so there are typically, in my experience, and this, I actually enjoy this with the design process. I like when my clients are seeing certain things in direction A and they're seeing certain things in direction B that are working for them. And then I'm able as a designer to pull all those things together and package them in the best way possible. I've heard some designers get kind of frustrated at this point, I feel like, where they feel like their client needs to either choose A or B, and they get flustered when clients I hear designers say that they want like a Frankenstein design. To me, it's not really like that. When I'm creating these two distinct directions, it's really, I'm asking a question. I'm asking my client, how comfortable are you with a very like modern take on this like mid-century floaty geometry? Like that's pretty boundary breaking for this client. So in direction A here on the left, I'm asking my client, are you comfortable with this? Or how comfortable are you with this? And then in the second direction, to me, this was a little bit on the safer side. She had mentioned the botanicals idea several times, so I wanted to include that in one of these directions. I also had the sunburst idea, and I liked the meaning behind all that, so I wanted to try that out and see what she thought about it. Again, here you can already see some of that layering starting here. And so all these things, this direction, I'm asking my client, how safe do you want to go? What parts and pieces of this are you super comfortable relying on and that you see working for your brand? It's really a big question at this point, and I don't mind as a designer taking parts and pieces from both. I want to hear that from my client. What's working? What's not working? What are you really responding to, and what's resonating for your brand? So I like taking all of that information and then folding it in together. So from this big design dump and the two design directions that I developed from here, then my job is to start developing that brand a little bit more and pull in all my clients' feedback. And so what that looked like in this instance, she mentioned a few things that she really liked. What I got back from my client was that there was something about this brand that resonated with her. She said when she opened up the files, this was one that it caught her eye immediately. So to me as a designer, that's very interesting. But when we proceeded with our conversations, we were mostly talking about this brand, specifically with the botanicals. She really liked the sunburst, but thought maybe it was too much on both sides, which is cool. And then what else about this? Oh, the color scheme. So the color scheme was a big one. And when I was giving these two directions, I didn't really go exactly down the middle to the color scheme that I knew she wanted. I kind of pieced the color scheme apart a little bit and shared in two different ways. So on this left side, I was giving a little bit more of a soft palette with that mustard yellow as a real bold accent, whereas this direction on the right is really based on these three bright colors, the navy, the gold, and the coral, and bringing those colors together in a bit of a bolder way. So again, it's a question. Do you want to go a little softer with the colors? Do you want to go a little brighter brighter, bolder with the colors? Where are we with that? And so she gave me some feedback on that, and color was one of the number one things we were working on with the revised design. So here's my revised design file, and this is where I start. I literally pull in, I copy and paste into a new file, what is working. So what were those parts and pieces that my client really responded to? Number one, she liked the typography. We weren't sure at this point if it was exactly the right typeface, but there were a lot of things here that she really liked, especially which is why I chose it, the little kind of personality-filled leg of the R. I think that that was a very distinct part of this typeface, and then the rest of it is very clean and geometric. So anyway, that was something that resonated with her. And so that was the first thing I pulled in, was this typography. There was something about this brand that she liked, so I want to keep that in mind. And then she also mentioned, of course, the sunburst here, and how maybe we could try it on just one side. So that's what I've pulled in to start with. There was also something, these are like Instagram mock-up templates. There was something here that she liked about these, and I think that mainly it was this large font. I think she really appreciated the bold, modern, geometric font that I used here as the Instagram graphics. So that was really working for her. So from there, though, I need to start expanding and continuing to practice and build on these ideas. As I mentioned, the number one thing we needed to talk about was color. And so here you can start to see I am playing with the colors that we are honing in on. What I started to realize was that I think that for her brand, it would be really beneficial to have a wide spectrum of colors. So rather than just having one or two, bright, bold accent colors and then a couple neutrals, I really wanted to give her an expanded palette that all work together, so that as she moves forward with this brand toolkit I'm giving her, she can piece together whatever colors are appropriate for her brand at that time. So my job here was to develop a palette that's really, really flexible. You can see here we still have that kind of golden mustard color, that coral color, and that navy blue, and then I folded in this lighter aqua, and I tried this little wild card of the green, and we'll see how that goes. But you can see one of the first things I want to know is, how does the typography look in these colors? Obviously, some of the lighter colors are not going to show up as well, but I just want to see it. I don't know until I actually try it out, practice your ideas, and see it working in person. But you can see that these neutral blues are working pretty well, especially obviously the darker ones. And then these three bright, citrusy accent colors here, they're working quite well on the white also. And then I want to see how are all of these colors, how are they working on the different backgrounds. So I gave her all these kinds of options to see what is working and what's not working. Again, then I want to start exploring a little bit more. I had mentioned that highlight idea. That was an idea that started resonating early on when we were talking about the layering. And so again, I want to see, how is the typography and those colors, how are they working together in that highlight situation? And the answer was, they're working pretty well. I kind of like it, right? So I've practiced and practiced. I've combined all these different ideas, and I'm honing in here on what's actually working. And so here is a good look, and you saw that on the final brand board already, how this idea came out kind of in this middle phase. Based on the typography we like, the colors that we're getting closer to, and the concept of layering. That's a big part of the brand that's already been folded in. And you can see here and this looks very similar to that branding board I showed you. I am playing with those typefaces, trying to see how these things are working. And this is actually the point in the process I pulled in this script font. I wanted to make sure these fonts actually all came from Canva, because my client is going to be working in Canva after I'm done and hand over a branding toolkit. So I want to make sure that she is able to use all these parts and pieces that I've developed as part of her brand. So I actually start backwards and reverse engineer. I go into free Canva and make sure that I have access to fonts that could work for her. No, extra premium accounts or anything like that. I want to make sure that it's actually available to her. This font actually was available for free for her through Canva, and so I started folding it into the brand because I felt like it was it's that right tone for her. She's talked a lot about kind of this handmade aspect and that personal aspect. So to me, this very loose script kind of did that for me. So one of the trickiest parts that I've already mentioned is that it is quite illegible at small sizes. So as a designer, I just have to keep that in mind as I move forward. But you can see that the typography also, just the bold typography from that Instagram graphic she liked, that is also working in this highlight situation. And this was just continuing to play with those colors and seeing which colors start to work with each other. And speaking of which, this was really my big color experiment here. I wanted to take a detailed look, and this is what happens in Illustrator documents. You start with one little thing and you copy it this way and then this way and then this way, and you just copy, copy, copy until you have a million of them, and you can do whatever you want with them, right? You're not going to break it, so you might as well just copy and paste all over the place and practice stuff. Try it out and see how it's going. And so that's what I was doing here. I was really experimenting with what colors can be layered on what other colors. And so I found a few that were working quite well. Obviously, the blue neutrals that I was using, they worked together well. Those three bold accent colors I chose, they were working with some of the lighter colors. Especially, I was very interested in this mustard and pink combination. To me, that was quite interesting. And of course, that gray neutral with those brighter colors on top. Again, here you can see I've used the pink almost as a neutral and layered in the brighter color over it. So here we are back to looking at that sunburst element in some of those different colors. And I'm starting to think about those little highlight shapes. To me, this was still pulling in a little bit of that mid-century mod feel, and that kind of got a little bit lost in the next phase. But if you look closely, it's not entirely lost. I'll point out some parts where I feel like that mid-century mod inspiration kind of just stayed with this process. It was one of those really early ideas I had in my sketchbook, and just the tiniest little hint of it stayed through the rest of this process. So here it is in this kind of mid-range branding board here in the middle of the process. And of course, we had talked about the botanicals many, many times. And so I wanted to start giving her a little bit more of an expanded palette of handmade botanical designs. I did draw these in on my iPad with the Apple Pencil. And so that's why they're nice and clean. But I think I did them in Procreate and used Live Trace and Illustrator. But of course now with Adobe Fresco or Adobe Illustrator on the iPad, you could develop them as vectors in Illustrator on the iPad, and you wouldn't even have to Live Trace, which is actually much, much better. So some awesome new Adobe features here recently. And then one of the other things I really wanted to look at is starting to look at how these parts and pieces are coming together. So I've introduced the sunburst idea, this layering idea, the highlights, these bright bold colors, this little logo mark down here. One of her biggest outlets is going to be her Instagram feed and her YouTube channel. And so what I really want to do here is start looking at how can some of these graphics come together? How does this whole branding toolkit come together and be used in something really practical, like an Instagram feed. So here I am just trying to layer in all the different parts and pieces together and see how it's working as a brand. And so some things are very much working here. I think that the branding elements are coming together quite well. I think the typography is definitely getting there. There are a lot of things I'm starting to like here. And so this is the point where I share all of this with my client, and I'm able to hear back from her about any of her thoughts. And so one of the biggest things that came out of this conversation, we really liked a lot of the elements. We liked the layering. We liked the typography. I think at this point she wasn't so sure from the first round if this typeface was the actual exact right one. But then after seeing it in this round of revisions, she grew to like it even more, and seeing it in place, I think, helped her see that this might be the correct choice here. So I think even though I went into it a little unsure about the typeface, I think by the time we layered everything together, it really came together and demonstrated that it might be the right choice for us. So from this, then I start getting into that final revised branding board. This was just a mock-up of the PDFs I actually sent my client. So this big crazy mess of an Illustrator file here, you can see I have parts and pieces just everywhere. This is, I call it like the boneyard, where I put the ideas that didn't quite work. And then I took all of these different elements and I wanted to give her a file so that she could look at it and review it cleanly and be able to provide coherent, concise, feedback for me. So this was just the PDF there. And then going from this and pulling some of those working elements, pulling all those things that she's saying, absolutely, that's spot on. And pulling those things, the one thing we're not quite there on is the color scheme. So that is, that's been one of the biggest questions throughout this whole design process is what is going to be that final color scheme. She found some more inspiration. So she went on her own and she sent me a couple inspiration images to continue working on the color palette. And so from there, I was able to develop this final branding board. And so where we are here, you can see at the very top here, I have those initial designs. This is the old color palette from the last round I just showed you. And so I just copied and pasted those in here. Obviously the logo, we did get to a good spot, but the main thing is that I hadn't kerned this yet because I didn't know if it was the right font or not. I'm still not entirely done with the kerning, I don't think. Every time I look at it, there's something new and different. So don't judge me right now on the kerning, but it's definitely getting there. But you can see that we have kind of honed in now on those parts and pieces that are working, and I have finally developed that final mark here. So it's gone through multiple stages just to get to this point. And when you open this up and you look at this mark, it's very simple. There's not a lot going on here. I didn't create any, really crazy abstract forms or really unique shapes or anything like that, but it still takes all those steps of refinement to get to this really lovely simplicity. Simplicity is sometimes the hardest thing to find in your designs. And so here I am with the final logo, maybe not the final kerning, but the final logo, and I want to start expressing the rest of this in her final brand board. The brand board itself is really a descriptive document, and so I think every part and piece of your brand board should be branded itself. There's no reason to have extra typefaces or your branded typefaces for your design company or whatever it is. I think it's important that the brand board is entirely branded in your client's brand. And so I have started layering in all those parts and pieces that are going to make up her entire branding system. So some little things, those botanicals, these I actually did find on Creative Market. So going from my handmade botanicals, we realized that we wanted to open the door a little bit more to some variety. I was really focused on the palm idea as a symbol for some of the concepts of her brand. But when I started doing some research, I found this set on Creative Market that was absolutely gorgeous. They're the most beautiful handmade botanicals. I'll link them in the description here. But it had, 200 hand-drawn botanicals, all vector shapes. They're all beautifully coordinated. And that way it gives me a huge variety of parts and pieces to work with. So I do offer, handmade botanicals, handmade illustrations, all that kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean that at the end of the day, I don't rely on other designers and their work as well. Just the same as I'm using a typeface here that another designer developed, I can use these parts and pieces in my own way in this branding in order to give my client a unique look. So I am using these botanicals probably in a completely different way than a lot of other people. I did purchase these botanicals, so it was a set for about $15. And you just want to really make sure that you are, honestly, that you're doing a few things here. You want to first, be smart about how you're spending your design time. You don't have to completely 100% make things from the ground up yourself every single time. There are so many resources out there, Adobe Stock and Creative Market and all these really great tools out there. But you also want to make it your own. I think that's the biggest issue with using parts and pieces from other people's designs. This logo I drew myself. I think your logos, you should always always, always draw yourself. There is no way that you're going to be able to pull a graphic from somebody, put some typography on it, and call it your own. That's just not what we do as designers. There might be parts and pieces of that logo that you like, that you appreciate, that influence your design or your thinking, but you have to draw it yourself. You have to make it your own somehow. Change it up. It's not enough to just change a color or to just add some lettering or to just change one little element. You really have to make your logos yourself from the ground up. I would highly, highly recommend that you're not using found graphics for any of your logo work. You really, as a graphic designer, you really need to be developing these things on your own. But that said, you can see I have folded in some of these elements from other designers, which I have purchased legally, the commercial license, in order for me to be allowed to do this. If you're working on school projects and things like that, you want to be even more careful, because I think that your instructors are going to be really, really particular about what's yours and what's not yours. So if at all possible, make it yourself. If it's not possible, in this instance, I've shown you that I have drawn many on my own. If you are working on a school project or something, stick with stuff like this that you have created. But if you're working on a client project and I had a necessity here. I needed, 200 plus botanical graphics in a short period of time that are already set up for my client. There's no reason for me as a professional designer to spend, 10 hours, 12 hours drawing custom botanicals when I can help my client out for a lot less. There's no reason to spend her design hours on me designing something that I can choose like this. But that said, I have also put my own spin on it. I've curated the exact ones I want to use. I've changed the colors, and then using it in this layering branding that I've created has started to make it my own. So the logo is 100% my own, but I have layered in graphics from another designer here, just with that kind of tertiary layer of the botanicals. But anyway, you can see here I have developed that color palette once more, and just showing those that primary logo in the entire color palette. And then I have labeled the secondary logo types area here. Again, that highlight idea has maintained throughout this whole process, so that little seed of an idea is coming back here in the final branding. You can see the new colors are working well with all of these iterations. And I had mentioned that mid-century mod idea hadn't quite died either. My little nod to mid-century mod here was this layering aspect of having the typography kind of slide and float off of this background little element. To me, that kind of floatiness, that was the aspect of that mid-century mod, combined with this very geometric typeface and these nice sharp pointy corners of all these rectangles. All of that kind of mid-century mod floatiness, to me, that's what I was really going for there. And that to me contrasts quite nicely with this very organic, handmade idea in the botanicals. To me, those two things together, that's where this brand is really coming together. Here is my expanded color palette. We have the darker shades that are the primary colors. Obviously I do have kind of primary colors here at the top, but these are the primary colors for use in this brand, are the darker shades here. And then these lighter accent colors add some flexibility here. This gives me options. You don't need to have a complete entire rainbow spectrum on your brand board. You want to hone in a little bit, but you also want to give yourself a little bit of flexibility. So I'd recommend more than just 2 or 3 colors, but if you get into like 12, 16 color territory, you've way overdone it. Try to find that nice middle ground between having way too much and not having enough for yourself to actually go out and design these parts and pieces. Again, here you've already seen this part is where I started describing the typography, and again demonstrating how all of these things come together. So I wanted to show that typography in use with the highlight idea. You can see the background colors here are those lighter shades, and that's where that flexibility comes in. I can use the darker shades as the typography, and I can use the lighter shades as the accent colors in the background, and you're getting enough contrast in order to help the legibility of this typeface. And And so then down at the bottom, I just wanted to sign off a little bit, reiterate that primary logo mark here. Um, and once again, demonstrate how these layering aspects can be used. So from start to finish, that is this brand. A lot of things came together with this. Obviously, it has a lot of influence from not only my client, but my input and all the inspirations that I found and collected both in my sketchbook, on Pinterest. If you go on my Pinterest boards, I'm sure you'll see some pieces on my design inspiration board that might relate to this. I'd be very curious to see what you find there and see how it relates to how the rest of this process played out. So that's where I am with this brand right now. I have created this toolkit, and this is so important to have this very robust, but I'm almost going to say concise toolkit. You don't want to have, just like the colors, you don't want to have too many parts and pieces. It's too confusing for people. A lot of times in this environment now, designers are handing off a toolkit to their client. Our clients now, they have to be creating their own graphics for social media, for their Facebook page, for an advertisement that they're purchasing, anything like that. A lot of people are making things on their own, and stuff like Canva is making it easier than ever. People have access to be making things on their own. There's no reason for graphic designers these days to create a branding toolkit that can only be used by them. You don't want it to be so completely custom that nobody else has the ability to work on things, because your clients are going to get really frustrated really quickly. It is just not a good way to work if you don't have access to those parts and pieces you need. So this is actually how I approach all my branding projects now. Of course, from that design process all the way from identifying the challenge in my sketchbook, generating all those ideas in my sketchbook. Then I started moving into Illustrator. I practiced my ideas over and over again. And in cycles with that, I was presenting these ideas to my client. I was presenting them to her in order to get her feedback. I listened to her feedback. I internalized her feedback, and I tried to continue practicing in order to provide her something that is the answer for her brand. So those cycles of practicing your ideas, presenting your ideas to someone, if it's not a client, maybe it's a family member or somebody else you trust, another creative person, reach out online, put something on, an Instagram story or something quick like that. You can get feedback from all kinds of places. And then once you get that feedback, that last cycle of the design process, you have to reflect and refine on your designs. You have to continue pushing your work forward. So while I had that one idea in my sketchbook that came really early on, that mid-century mod, like geometric design, that was like the first thing that popped into my mind when I started talking to this client. But over time, that idea changed and grew, and I was not 100% stuck on it. I'm not going to force that idea on her because it's obviously not the right fit. We've had all these conversations, we've gone in different directions, we've tried all these different things, and because we've had those conversations and because I was open to her feedback and I was open to refining my own designs, I was able to present her something that does fit, that she's a lot more comfortable with, and we have a branding system that both of us are really, really happy with. I'm so excited to start taking this brand and put it on all these different parts and pieces. So that's where we're going to go next. I'm going to help show you how you might take a branding toolkit like this from your branding board and then translate it to a print piece or a web piece, like a brochure or an app design or something like that. Thank you so much for watching all of this. I hope that you got a little bit better insight about what this process is like and some of those steps that you might be going through. The main thing is to have an open mind. Be open to all those new awesome ideas that are out there, because they are out there. And if you're frustrated and you don't have the idea right now, there is some sort of issue in your design process. Your job is to find where the issue is. Where are you getting stuck? Did you miss inspiration? Do you need to go and look at more designs? Do you need to ask more questions of your client? Do you need to try something completely different? Do you need to take a break and go for a walk instead of sitting at your desk and, being mad at yourself that you can't come up with an idea, go for a walk, go for a, museum visit a museum virtually online, whatever you need to do to unstuck yourself. That is one of the biggest challenges for designers, for sure, for all of us. And it happens in lots of different ways. So just keep working somehow, even if it means taking a break for a few minutes and filling up your brain with something else creative. Try something completely different if nothing else is working. I hope that this was helpful. Please let me know any of your questions, and I would be happy to help you move your brands forward. I love branding design. This is like one of my number one things to do as a graphic designer. So with all of that, I will talk to you soon, and I will be in the comments and everything in case you have questions.